Imani Gandy, it is always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for being with us again today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I got to be honest with you. One day we're going to bring you on and there will be good news in reproductive justice to discuss. One day. I sense it.
In my lifetime, I don't know. Maybe we'll be ghosts.
We can come back as ancestors and haunt the next round of people. Say, we told y'all what was happening. Listen to the podcast. Imani, we are in a place right now where it seems like things that we thought were completely locked in, like baked into our set of rights. I mean, we knew the racism was there, but there was just some things that we kind of assumed would always be. Like my ability to decide, I live in a state that doesn't provide the type of materials or resources that I need. So I'm going to get in my automobile or get in a bus or a train or a plane, and I'm going to go to another place to secure the resources that I need. It just so happens I could do that if, say, the resource were, I don't know, Reese's peanut butter cups, one of my favorite candies. I could do that. If I felt that I wasn't getting access to quality Reese's peanut butter cups in the state of New York, I could travel to New Jersey and go find me a Reese's peanut butter cup. However, Imani, it has come to our attention that if I wanted to leave my state, which does not provide the type of health care that I need, and I wanted to pick up and go to get into another state, which does provide the health care that I need, then I might actually be running into some logistical and now legal problems. What is happening in the Midwestern portion of this nation that is causing alarm bells to ring off? Because apparently the right to travel to get what you need from other places isn't really as much of a right as we thought it was, if you're talking about reproductive justice or gender affirming medical care. Talk to us about what the hell is happening here.
It's just constitutional shenanigans. It's really, I can't describe really what's going on without prefacing it by saying we are dealing with a group of federal court judges, appellate court judges. 1 in 4 of them are Trump judges. 1 in 4 of them are Federalist Society handpicked people who are more or less incompetent and unable to do the job that they are tasked to be doing. And we are also living in a world where 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are also Federalist Society associated. So the law used to be somewhat fixed, like there was some room for debate around the edges, but there was some, as you said, some core principles that we all agreed on that we were all going to live by. One of them being a state can't force you to stay within its borders. That just seems like basic sense. I live in Colorado. Colorado can't force me to stay here if I want to leave for a non-illegal reason, right? Like there are laws, for example, we're talking about Missouri. Missouri, this woman, Mary Elizabeth Coleman, this representative in Missouri, has introduced a law that would make it a felony for a person to for a person to leave the state to obtain abortion care. Missouri has clamped down on abortion in its own borders, and it has been attacking essentially the 1 or 2 remaining clinics. The number of clinics remaining sort of vacillates, but the 1 or 2 remaining clinics have been under siege by Missouri lawmakers for 5 years now. Wow. I mean, they have just been passing bill after bill after bill, targeted regulations, abortion bans, just removing public funds, anything that they could do to make these clinics close. And so as a result, a lot of people in Missouri have to go over to Illinois to a place called Hope Clinic. And that's where a lot of people who need abortions in Missouri go. Missouri lawmakers don't like that. They don't want, they have this interest, this legitimate state interest in potential fetal life, right? And if that legitimate state interest is leaving the state, and is going to get terminated by its hosts in another state, well, that's something that Missouri lawmakers can't have. So they want to make sure that the hosts of the state interest can't leave the state and go take care of its own, making its own decision, their own decision about what they're going to do with their body. I mean, it's bizarre. And, we have a constitutional right to travel. Right. It's not one of those rights that, conservatives love to throw it in your face if a particular right isn't expressly written down in the Constitution. Right. There's no right to the word abortion doesn't appear in the Constitution. The word travel really may not appear. It probably does in the Privileges and Immunities Clause. But anyway, they'll try to say that unless the right is in the Bill of Rights, essentially, or is the Second Amendment, the right doesn't necessarily exist. But that's not the case. First of all, there's the 9th Amendment, which says that all the rights that aren't written down are retained by the people. The right to move is one of those rights. But you don't even need to look at the 9th Amendment. You can look at the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The right to travel is one of the liberties covered by the Due Process Clause. The right to travel is one of the liberties covered by the Privileges and Immunities Clause, which basically says if you live in one state and you go to another state, you are allowed to avail yourselves of all the laws and the privileges of that state, right? Like the state can't say, like, for example, if you're coming from, I don't know, Wyoming to Colorado and you want to buy weed in Colorado, usually Colorado can't say, oh, well, you don't live here, so you can't do that. No, because you are in the state, you get to avail yourselves of those privileges and immunities. That should hold true for health care, right? That should hold true for abortion care, but they're trying to force people to stay in Missouri. In Idaho, there's this wave of anti-trans laws, these laws that ban gender-affirming health care for trans kids. We see in Texas, there's a fight in Texas where Texas is trying to literally investigate parents in order to determine whether or not they are providing gender-affirming care in coordination, in conjunction with their doctors, right? Idaho doesn't like that. Idaho wants to make it a felony to, Idaho is a little bit of a tricky case. Idaho actually passed a bill related to the genital mutilation of a child.
What?
During the do you remember the female circumcision panic?
Yes.
Right? Where everyone was concerned that women in Africa were coming here, that African cultures were bringing whatever female circumcision culture may or may not exist in certain Western African countries. They were bringing it here. Just as there was this white panic about Asian American immigrants bringing their quote unquote no girls policy from those countries here. It turned out not to be true, just as the female circumcision panic turned out not to be true. But states began to enact these laws to prohibit essentially the cutting of the labia and the clitoris, like specifically female circumcision. What Idaho has
question
done,
for you, but before you move on, specifically banning the cutting of the labia and the clitoris. Nothing about penile foreskin? Are we still? Are we making?
I don't recall. I don't want to say that it doesn't because I don't recall, but I do. I specifically remember the female genitalia being mentioned.
I feel I'm going to go out on a limb here and say
I would go out on a limb and say no.
If there were a ban
I feel like
against,
it would have stuck in my mind.
I'm willing to bet, and I'm not a betting woman, but I'm willing to bet that if there were a ban against cutting foreskin off of baby boy penises, that we would probably hear a lot about it. So we do not. It remains unconfirmed. That is just Lurie's suspicions. I'll take that, Imani. If I'm wrong, that'll be on me. I'll take that one. But
absolutely, that'll be on me too. But so what Idaho has done, and this is actually really nefarious and gross, they have tacked on a provision dealing with puberty blockers and gender affirming care onto this bill relating to the quote genital mutilation of a child. Wow. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make gender affirming care, consensual health care in conjunction with a parent and a doctor, the same as female circumcision. Wow. Right? And the way they're otherizing it, right? Female circumcision is scary and it's what black people do and they mutilate each other and blah, blah, blah. And that's what being trans is. Being trans and getting gender affirming care is like what those black people do to each other. You know what I mean? It's this very sort of nefarious, racialized. I mean, it's not there plainly, but if you have common sense and you know the history, right, you can. It's the undercurrent of that, right? So now we're trying to make it seem as if gender affirming care is some monstrous mutilation that people are perpetrating on kids. And because in Idaho it is a felony to take a child out of state for genital mutilation purposes, if this law goes forward in the Senate and amendments happen, or if the law is rewritten in order to center blocking gender affirming care, they will make it a felony to take your child out of state to get gender affirming care. That's not the way the law reads now, but that's just because they tacked on an amendment and they hadn't thought clearly about what the implications of the law were. They hadn't thought about whether or not they wanted to make that felony provision applicable to this new bit that they tacked on, if that makes sense to you. I mean, it's just, and part of it is, part of me trying to explain it in a way that makes sense is the point. It's supposed to be confusing, right? Because they're passing these laws so quickly and so furiously. And these are laws that they don't even necessarily write themselves. These are laws that are written by Americans United for Life or by ALEC, these conservative think tanks, and they just send these laws to Republican lawmakers, and the lawmakers just fill them in as if they're Mad Libs. So frequently, people don't know what's in the bill. For example, back to Missouri, the person who introduced a bill that would have essentially said that a person who has an ectopic pregnancy either has to try to put that ectopic pregnancy back in the uterus or die.
Oh my God.
They're basically trying to make it seem as if it's a medical possibility to reimplant an ectopic pregnancy. It's not. It cannot be done. Wow. So if you don't permit a person who has an ectopic pregnancy to get an abortion, which is what this Missouri bill does, it says if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you can't get an abortion, then you're consigning people with ectopic pregnancies to death. There are no two ways about it. But when confronted with that fact, Brian Seitz, who is the sponsor of this bill, said, oh, no, well, everyone, you liberal feminazis are misrepresenting what I'm saying. No, we're not, Brian. We're pointing out that even if that's not what you intended, because you people don't read the bills that you're trying to pass, you just grab them from some think tank and put them up for debate in your legislatures. That's part of the damn problem, right? Wow. And so we're just... the acceleration is what's really concerning to me. Every 2 weeks I come here and talk to you, and every 2 weeks it's worse, it seems like.
I said, at some point you're going to come with some good news. That day is clearly not today, Imani. And
no, it's not. I mean, there is some good news. There is some good news. For example, the state court in Texas has blocked Ken Paxton's efforts to go after trans kids and their families.
Okay.
So that's blocked right now.
Okay. Small relief.
That's good, right? So far, the Idaho Senate is refusing to go forward with this trans bill, not because they care about trans kids, but because they're concerned that the breadth of the bill would encompass care that's not related to trans kids. So
you mean like young kids getting like a nose job or
other sorts of gene therapy for kids who have sort of medical issues, right?
Okay.
But because the bill is so poorly written, it covers the sort of, I don't want to say, it covers what these Republicans would consider normal, quote unquote, normal healthcare, right?
Wow.
Trans and gender affirming healthcare is outside the norm. And the Senate, in its statement as to why it was not moving forward with this bill, actually cited the Idaho Medical Association and said the IMA already says that gender affirming care is outside the normal practice of healthcare. So they're just waiting to get a better bill that only targets trans kids and doesn't target other healthcare. So,
girl,
it's rough out there. It's rough out there.
It's hard to be a human in this society. I was going to qualify what type of human. It's just hard to be a human in this society.